In this video, I'm going to show you how to crochet a flat piece, starting from when you've got nothing but just plain yarn and a hook. So to begin with, you're going to make a foundation chain, and to do that, you need to first make a slip stitch, which means you will take your yarn and then create the number 4 with it by essentially picking a spot on the yarn and then bending the yarn tail to the right. See how there's this number 4 like this? Now, put your index finger and thumb through the loop of the 4 and then just bring it over to pick up the yarn that's attached to your yarn ball. And then pull the yarn tail so that a knot forms here. And don't worry if your loop is huge, because when you pull on the yarn that's attached to the yarn ball, it will make this loop smaller. So now you want to put your hook through that loop, tighten this loop until it's about the same width on the hook. You don't want to pull it so tight that you have trouble maneuvering the hook later on. Just enough so that it is literally the same circumference as the hook at this point. And you want to position it so that the slip knot that you just made is to the left of your hook. So now, hold onto your yarn as you normally would, and as a reminder, that's looping it over your pinky and then bringing it up on top of your index finger, and then holding the piece with either your thumb and middle finger or thumb and index finger, whatever is more comfortable for you. So now we're going to do what's called a foundation chain, and let's make 11 of them, and you'll see why I am saying an odd number, even though in the end what I want to do is create a flat crochet piece that's actually 10 single crochet stitches wide. So to make a foundation chain, what you're going to do is yarn over and then pull the yarn through the loop. So that was one chain. Here's the second chain, third, fourth. So notice how as I'm making every chain, I'm moving my hand to always be right, my left hand to always be right next to the hook, because it gives me more control when I'm manipulating the yarn. Versus if I held it all the way back here, it just feels a lot weaker, my control over this yarn. So I lost a bit of count. Let's count here how many stitches I've made. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All right, 11 chains in the foundation chain. And in terms of how tight you want this foundation chain to be, ideally your chains are all exactly the same size. As you can see, they were not exactly the same size over here for me. Usually that's what happens to me when I take a break in making the chain. So I would recommend trying to do this all in one go while your hand is used to the same amount of tension. So you'll see when you're doing this that these loops, when you crochet the next row on, tend to get a bit bigger. So I would err on the side of making these chains a little bit tighter. But again, you need to balance it with being able to easily put your hook in it later. So we have made the foundation chain, and now what we want to do is make the first row. And a lot of patterns you'll see will say, make the chain and then single crochet in the second chain from the hook. And the reason for that is because you are about to create another row, and for the row to actually be the right height, you want to let one of these chains be the stitch that gives it that height. So in case it's hard for you to tell which one of these chains is the second chain from the hook, remember you can always count from the beginning. So we made 11 chains. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And so I need to put my hook in between the loops of the second chain from the hook. So I'm going to basically split this chain in half with my hook. And now I'm going to just do a single crochet like I normally would, which is a yarn over, pull it through, so you have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull it through again. That was 1 single crochet. And see what I mean by how when you do this first row, because you're splitting this foundation chain, it makes this pretty big gap over here. And that's why I was recommending that you want to try to make the foundation chain actually a little bit tight. So since you sacrificed one of those chain stitches to be the height of this row, there's actually only going to be 10 single crochet stitches in this row. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. Alright, I've made 9 single crochet stitches so far. I'm going to make the 10th one over here. And I wanted to pause and show you because a lot of times people get confused about whether or not this slip knot is one of the chain stitches, since especially when you're working with smaller yarn, it might look like a really tight chain stitch. So just remember to keep count of how many stitches you've done. That'll really help. And also you can tug on it and see that when you tug on this slip knot just gets even tighter, versus when you tug and it's a chain stitch, it just moves the chain stitch. All right, so here's the 10th single crochet. And now to do the next row, you're gonna execute something called a chain 1 and turn. And depending on the pattern, they have you chain 1 at this moment, or they have you turn the piece and then chain 1. So I'm gonna show you a chain 1, which is yarning over and pulling it through this loop. And a turn literally means that you're just going to rotate the flat piece so that as you create the next row, you can continue going in the direction as you normally would, which is right to left if you're a righty. And remember that chain 1 is something we need to do because we're giving some height to the row. And it's only chain 1 in this case because we're doing a bunch of single crochet stitches. But if you had a pattern that wanted you to do things with like double crochet or triple crochet, you'd have to do a chain 2 to accommodate for the height of a double crochet stitch. The other thing that's different from how you treat this row and all the other rows beyond this very first one we just did is that now you're going to put your hook not through the middle of the V's, the top loops here of the stitch. You're actually going to put it as you normally would under the top loops of a stitch. And remember, you always want to skip the first chain from the hook. You're going to put the hook into what actually counts as the first stitch of this row, which is the second stitch from the hook. And as a reminder, we're going to do more single crochets, so yarn over, pull it through, yarn over, pull through both loops on the hook. And again, as you can see, if you rotate the piece a little bit to you, there's all these V's that indicate each stitch in this row. You need to put the hook under the top loops of the next stitch, yarn over, pull it through, and then continue on. I'm going to show you a complete row so you can see how this is slowly building into a flat crochet piece. So I'm actually going to pause here again because this is another point at which people often get confused about if this counts as a stitch in the row. My best advice would be again to count how many stitches you have so that you can keep track of it. And ideally you're actually keeping count of the stitches as you're crocheting them, so you don't have to keep going back and double checking. And the danger of forgetting a stitch is that you're slowly going to wind up with a flat piece that looks a bit angled instead of straight. You might wind up with a triangle instead of a rectangle. So remember, we needed a crochet piece that's 10 single crochet stitches wide. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That means, yes, indeedy, this is a stitch that we need to crochet a single crochet stitch in. And again, we're going to chain 1 and then turn the piece around so that we can keep on making another row. And that's how you crochet a flat piece.